This video was made possible by viewers like you over on Patreon. Check out the link in the description to hear how you can help make shows like this be even more amazing. Y'all ever heard of the movie Red Sun? It was a 1971 western about a group of bandits hijacking a train containing the ambassadors of Tokugawa Yoshinobu and stealing their diplomatic gift of an exquisite sword destined for President Ulysses S. Grant. With the bandit leader Link Stewart, played by Charles Bronson, betrayed, Ambassador Kuroda Jubei, played by Toshiro Mifune, enlists Link to find the treacherous Gauche? Whatever. Bring him to justice and reclaim the sword. But Link has other ideas, like finding out where Gauche hid the hull from the train. I don't know why, but after watching this movie a month back, I got weirdly obsessed with this comparison of late 1800s samurai and 1800s cowboys, two extremely different jewels of their country's generations who have been uniquely bound in cinema through the mid to late 1900s. Cause yeah, I know all these well-known spaghetti western movies are basically just retellings of old samurai movies, most of which coming from the great Akira Kurosawa. Fistful of Dollars is basically just Yojimbo, as was the Django. Magnificent Seven was just Seven Samurai, Blind Man was just Zatoichi, Requiem for a Gringo was just Harakiri, and The Outrage was just Rashomon, and the list goes on. But you know, I guess never mind the fact that some of Kurosawa's other works, such as Throne of Blood, The Bad Sleep Well, and None, were just flagrantly lifted from Shakespeare's Macbeth, Hamlet, and King Lear in that order. But I guess that's besides the point. The point is that a lot of people are talking about the connections between cowboy movies and samurai movies, especially online, with videos and essays talking about how one influenced the other in a multitude of ways and reasons, of which I'm going to be parroting a lot of their points and analyzing them, so Steak, Kino, Story Drive, go easy on me guys, I'm only wanting to add to the conversation. But the thing is, these essays usually only contextualize the relationship between cowboys and samurai exclusively in cinema, and I think that's a mistake. Because I think the dynamic of these two figures and the interest thereof is a lot more transient than that. Just as there's a sizable number of people in the West who love all things samurai, there's a pretty big group of people in Japan who love all things Wild Western. In Kumamoto, for example, there's the Country Gold Festival, with folks in the area getting all spruced up in cowpoke attire and line dancing, and this event's been going on consecutively for more than 15 years. Or how about the Seibu Geki Goko event in Chiba back in 2020 by Hyper Doraku, which spawned this little gem on the internet. Over 70 Wild West enthusiasts in full and authentic costume came together to live a day in the world of the Wild West. I mean, shoot, they've even got replica howitzers and Gatling guns. And Wild West themed bars? Those have been around in Tokyo and other big Japanese cities for well over 30 years at this point, showcasing the fact that behind the salaryman suits within packed rush hour trains, there's tons of hardcore weekend cowboys. In a weird twist of fate, the samurai movie epics that shaped the classic cowboy spaghetti western turned right back around, influencing Japanese audiences. Heck, Shigeru Miyamoto, arguably the most well-known individual in the gaming industry, is a great example, talking about how he grew up with western movies like Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke, and El Fuego Baka. Did I say that right? An interest that, from what I could tell, brought about the legendary Longmont Ranch into the Zelda franchise. And you can see how Japan's growing up with and love of old western movies permeated into its own media in the late 80s and early 90s, with shows like Trigun and Cowboy Bebop, or video games like Sunset Riders, Wild Guns, and Wild Arms. And there are plenty of other examples that even merge the two worlds of samurai and gunslingers together. Remember Samurai Western on the PS2 that had you as a samurai going around chopping up all kinds of western outlaws? Or god, what about Jiraiya from Kaku Rangers, the LA-born Black Ranger ninja introduced as a rollerblading, fast-drawing cowboy? Even one of my oldest and dearest Japanese friends who goes by the online handle of Hutch absolutely adores the Western aesthetic. I'm not able to really show it, but I can remember how happy he was when I got him his own Texas hat the last time we went to go visit him this year. And then again, when we started playing Fallout 76 together, how hard he wanted to lean into the cowboy aesthetic of his character. There's something here between these two figures that binds them, and more than just movies. Because the comparative interest in samurai in the West and cowboys in the East transcends cinematic media, becoming a love and identity, something that permeates the lives of people who love them. I mean, just listen to the reasons why so many of these Japanese cowboys got into the saddle, so to speak.
Well, I first got interested in cowboy things when I saw American movies and TV shows. Then I started listening to country and western music on Armed Forces radio and hanging out with these guys.
I don't know. I think my life is sort of like a cowboy's. You know, I ride a train to work. It's kind of like riding a horse. And my office is kind of like a ranch. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but roping in customers is how I make a living.
And I want to find out why. What is it about these two hyper-romanticized figures that brings people a literal world apart together? I mean, it's entirely possible that this is just another example of people liking what they like, and if so, that's that. But what floors me is that our cultures are so drastically different between the US and Japan that I find it surprising there's so much cultural cross-permeation when it comes to these two and their aesthetics. They are deeply rooted symbols of their unique cultures, and considering how different they are on the surface, I'm surprised they would even tolerate each other. No, seriously, put these two and their cultures together in a room by themselves and it's like looking at night and day. First of all, clothing. Cowpokes would look at a samurai's kimono and hakama combination and probably just call it a dress.
Well, unless you have some special use for men dressed up like women, let them.
As for the kamishimo, I think most folks would see that as a bit ridiculous. Likewise, samurai would look at cowboys and think they have zero decorum. No family symbolism, basic attire of cotton, and let's be real here, samurai would likely be put off by a cowboy's inevitable terrible smell. Samurai, on the other hand, were so careful about their scent that they would put perfume in their helmets should their heads be taken in battle and presented. Protocol would be a big clashing factor too. Samurai, even before this idea of Bushido, would still adhere to strict systems of conduct through their lives, big and small. How to bow, how low to bow, what words to use with their superiors and inferiors. There were just so many protocols that samurai were bound to. Cowboys and even local lawmen, on the other hand, were seen as extremely rough around the edges. Bending the laws as needed, constantly getting drunk, being far more callous and rude even their day-to-day, samurai would never associate themselves with that kind of behavior, honest though it may be. Finally, there's the context in which they fight. Samurai were taught from birth to be a warrior fighting other warriors for their superiors using tactics and cunning. And cowboys, while they did fight, were fighting to protect cattle, ranches, and their employers from wild animals, rustlers, natives, and whatever came from the wilderness. Not exactly something you need to draw battle lines for. The scope of combat between these two are just so incredibly different, it seems like they would have nothing to talk about when it came to fighting. But all that aside, I actually think there's infinitely more things that would actually bring these two fighters together rather than push them apart. Now, first of all, I can't really talk much about how these two are similar without talking about what makes them so similar in popular media. After all, that's probably why half of you are here. The catalyst that really brings these two figures into the hearts of people from Japan to the United States and vice versa equally is not only the romanticization, but how they're romanticized. Cowboys, gunslingers, and other folks of Western nature have long been believed to follow this Code of the West, or Gene Autry's Cowboy Code, a concept first chronicled by Zane Grey in his 1934 book of the same name. Though there was never any written code of cowpokes, many assume, or at least like to believe, that Western folk had an ethical set of rules and morals that govern their life, such as a cowboy must never shoot first, hit a smaller man, or take unfair advantage. He must always tell the truth. He must always be gentle with children, the elderly, and animals. He must help people in distress. He must keep himself clean in thought, speech, action, and personal habits. And if this is all starting to sound weirdly familiar, it's because it's almost entirely the same as the Code of Bushido, a collection of ethical concepts of truth, morality, servitude, and respect that many post-Edo period samurai would cling to. But much in the same way that the Cowboy Code and the Code of the West were established well after the time of cowboys' relevance, so too was Bushido created retroactively long past the true historical significance of samurai. I like to think of it like this. Samurai and cowboys would not only have much in common to talk about ethically, but would have much to say to each other about the importance of these codes given the time. And speaking of romanticized reverence, I think another thing that samurai and cowboys could easily come together on is their near mythical faith in their specialized weaponry, the glorification of the revolver and the katana. Two weapons which romanticized history would claim made or broke the samurai and the cowboy. In every idealized depiction of cowboys, they always had a revolver in hand, sometimes in two, and every samurai had a katana in hand, sometimes two. The great irony in all this is that when it comes to both of these figures, neither were so specialized. In fact, more often than not, they would use other weapons far more often and for the same reason. At the conception of the samurai in the 600s, bows were the go-to weapon, easy to use on horseback and made for greater distance fighting capabilities. After the Mongols, samurai would move predominantly to polearm weapons. It was only during the Edo period of peace did samurai begin to specialize and romanticize combat specifically with a katana. Likewise, cowboys didn't come out of the womb dual-wielding pistols. And don't get me wrong, the Colt 45 was a masterclass in personal firearms choice, but the West was won, more often than not, with rifles. The Hawk and Plains rifle, the Springfield trapdoor, the Winchester, the Sharps, the trusty double-barreled shotgun, all of these were equally, if not more, critical firearms in the West. And why? Because they had better range, better punching power, and greater ease of stable aiming using one's entire body of firing instead of just a stiff arm. Now that I think about it, that's the exact same reason why samurai started using guns in the 1600s. Like, let's be real here. In a real historical setting, I would imagine that cowboys and samurai would interact like Oda Nobunaga and Billy the Kid in the anime Drifters, both oohing and awing over the latest, greatest firearms tech throughout history. Heck, I'd imagine samurai would be telling their fair share of back in my day stories about guns, considering they used them over 200 years prior to the founding of the United States. And speaking of guns, oh, look at this boy. You want him? This plush cuddly throwback to samurai gunnery and my adorable V-tubing rig developed by the equally adorable Yuki Goomba? You want to get this little gunny tanuki, or ganuki as I like to call the genre of canids wielding heavy firearms? Then pop on over to Makeship via the link in the description. We got around 50 of these boys sold, but we gotta sell a total of 200 to get them made with roughly, I don't know at this point, what, 8 days to go? So grab your boy before it's too late. Right, sorry. Cowboys and samurai. So with the more fantastical and mythical aspects out of the way, let me explain why I think these two legends would actually get along in a real-life scenario. So for one, these were two figures that lived for their weapons. Cowboys would live, work, and ride every single day with their guns, and the idea of a cowpoke riding without one was unheard of. Likewise, samurai would live, work, and ride with their blades of choice. Everywhere they went, they had a blade at their belt and were taught to always be ready to use it. And for a samurai not to have a daisho out in public was not only unheard of, but it was technically illegal. Even the ritualistic levels of maintenance and appreciation could be something they could both share. A Colt 45 revolver and a Masamune blade easily have one thing in common: craftsmanship. While both are fairly simple weapons mechanically, there is a hidden level of appreciation that both of these two could understand and appreciate through these two weapons. An appreciation that I very much believe we could see to this day from Japanese appreciating a Colt 45 or Winchester, while the American could appreciate the craftsmanship of a well-tempered toll. But that's not the only thing that these two could appreciate. These two historical figures were defined by the horse, samurai quite literally. In Japan, the only people who were allowed to use and own horses were those of the samurai class, and with that right came hundreds of years of exclusive combat and animal handling training to the samurai. Like the use of the bow, it wasn't until after the Mongolian invasion of the 1270s that samurai would even consider fighting with their feet on the ground. Cowboys, on the other hand, though not bound by any law or social obligation, would never consider being without their horse, for the more practical reason of if you had no horse, you were probably just gonna die out in the Great American Plains or the harsher deserts on the western side of the country. It would also make your primary job of cattle driving near impossible without the speed and maneuverability of your horse. Despite the very different uses of these animals, it's incredibly safe to say that these two not only loved horses, but could easily share much to bond over with them. But with that out of the way, let me move on to some of the less considered similarities that could easily bond the samurai and cowboy together. And I think the best one I could think of is speed. Now consider this. What is the greatest spectacle of the 1800s cowboy? What are they most well known for, not only in cinema, but just any sort of historical context? Now most of you likely said the quick draw, where the faster you shoot, the faster you can take down that no good dirty polecat bandit that's been harassing your local town. Well, what about the samurai? What in both media and real life are they the most well known for? In my opinion, that would be the adoration of iaijutsu, that amazing ability of being able to draw your sword and strike in a blink of an eye, felling dozens of rabble of nobuseri that's been harassing your local village. Now, that might seem like a coincidence, but what makes this particular observation really interesting is that cowboys and samurai practice these two things for the exact same reason. If the cowboy code was anything to be believed, Rule 1 was to never shoot first. A possible piece of the unspoken rules of the West of don't be the first to incur violence. Well, samurai in the Edo period had the exact same rule under much greater penalty. If you were a samurai under the local magistrate office or other local authorities, if you drew your blade first, it could mean your literal head. A samurai would never allow themselves to draw their blades first. Whoever did draw their blade first always was the one legally responsible. Thus, samurai developed and closely adopted iaijutsu as a way of being able to unsheath and strike faster than their would-be aggressors who had already begun pulling a blade. Shooting or slashing, it really didn't matter. These two things were done for the exact same reasons. And I could easily imagine a cowboy and samurai trying to outspeed each other in terms of who could draw and shoot or who could draw and slice first. Now, this next observation might sound a lot more stupid, but I think one thing that cowboys and samurai would both have in common, and could respect, would be their hair. Now, I know, one of them is a clean-cut short affair, while the other is a near foot long of hair tied up over a shaved head. But despite these two looks being drastically different, they serve the exact same purpose. Samurai would wear the chonmage hairstyle with a shaved head and pulled up and tied ponytail in order to keep their head cool and scalps cushioned while they wore their helmets. That is the bottom line. Cowboys, on the flip side, would keep their hair short and clean to facilitate their hats, which kept their faces out of the hot sun and helped them regulate temperature. In fact, let's talk about hats for a literal hot second. Cowboys are iconic for their 10-gallon hats with their wide brims and pointed centers, while samurai were well known for their jingasa hats, which have wide brims and pointed centers. Come on, man! The only difference here is that one was made of cowhide and dipped, while the other was made of vegetation and cone-shaped. Aside from that slight detail, they are fundamentally the exact same hat with the exact same purpose: keep nature out of your face. Finally, there's one great unifier between cowboys and samurai that I think could really bring them closer together than anything else could, and I'll tell you right now, it's not the idea of the wandering warrior trying to prove one's code of conduct. I know there are plenty of other essayists who would claim that the wandering nature of the cowboy who followed the code of the West was in direct comparison with the samurai that was sent on the journey of the Musha Shugyo, but I find this to be a very poor example for two reasons. One, while plenty of cowboys were roamers, I can't imagine many of them in real life would really care that much about showcasing their own personal code of the West. In reality, cowboys were more or less rambunctious drifters cited in the Police Gazette in 1879 as, quote, gloriously drunk that begins to yell like a wild Indian and shoots off his big revolvers promiscuously into a crowd. He's little less than a crazy demon at such times, and woe betide the man who crosses his path. Yeah, that doesn't exactly strike me as John Wayne material. And two, samurai who left on Musha Shugyo warrior pilgrimages were very, very few and far between. In a samurai's heart, their place was serving their superior and fighting, not gallivanting across Japan. Could they learn a lot of useful things and have a lot of great life lessons? Sure, but here's the other problem. While on a Musha Shugyo, a samurai was classified then as a ronin. And let me just say right now, you don't ever want to be a ronin. Not only will people look at you with distrust as you have no family or clan to serve in the meantime, but you are also completely lacking in the protection of a family or clan. Safe to say, it wasn't exactly an occupation many samurai ever really wanted. No, the one thing that I think really binds the samurai and the cowboy together is modernization. Think about it. So many of the greatest samurai movies are in regard to either the times changing due to the Tokugawa shogunate or the Meiji Restoration, or the very fallout of the Edo period or the Meiji Restoration's peacetime, where there would be this big conflict of identity and would have well-meaning samurai turn to Nobuseri bandits. They were quickly entering a time where they were not needed anymore. Their lifestyle of war was just not necessary. In fact, in some cases, it was detrimental to the Edo period's newfound peace. Same too do so many stories of cowboys revolve around the modernization of the US in the 1800s. Not just in terms of the Industrial Revolution, but the increasing power of the rich, nearly autocratic businessmen who controlled much of the property that cowboys were paid to protect and maintain. What ended up killing the cowboy way of life was the modernization of the ranching industry and the Industrial Revolution that demystified the Wild West. As ranches grew and technology developed, cowboys became more and more redundant, with machines quickly taking over their jobs in the Industrial Revolution. And as those ranches grew and industry boomed, more and more businesses filled the West, which by that point wasn't so wild anymore. Despite their self-sustaining skills, grit, and hard-working nature, cowboys just were not needed anymore. For samurai, it was no different except for the fact that instead of corporations, it was the establishment of a centralized government that had been absent for nearly 300 years. Samurai, like cowboys at their core, were hired help. Hired by daimyo landlords to protect their territory from invasion due to the fracturing of Japan that lasted for centuries. But as the country reunified under one government, there was no longer any need to pay samurai for protection. Actually, no, scratch that, I'm wrong. It was corporations because the merchant class, which was at the bottom of the totem pole in Japan, had, during the Edo period, taken power away from the samurai class, which inevitably led to the Boshin War. Modernization and economy made samurai irrelevant. And you know what, if you still don't believe me, Red Sun brings up this exact point and perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about here.
Samurai life is service. Kodo Bushido says be strong. Have courage. Sacrifice yourself for your master. My father was samurai. His father, he is. 400 years or died fighting. There is great honor in my family. But now, all is changed. Japan has had big wars between lords, has become a different country. Soon a great nation like yours. Then samurai life will finish. All must give up swords, become farmers, fishermen, become nothing. So I must succeed. One last time.
So all in all, this is why I believe that the very essence of samurai and cowboy are so easy to permeate between the vastly different cultures of the US and Japan. While there are plenty of differences, there's far more reasons why, both fictitious and real, that there's this nation-spanning appreciation of these two figures of history. I never thought about it like this until I saw this movie and really considered all these things. Also, please go check out my Ganuki boy on Makeship, please. I want him to be a real boy, and I want people who love him to have him too. And a huge thank you to my patrons who continue to support off-the-wall, wild video ideas like this. And if you want to help make videos like this a reality, get them early, or help decide topics, be sure to check us out on Patreon. So, if nothing else, thanks for watching, everyone. I'm gonna be real with y'all, I have no idea what I'm gonna be working on next, but October is right around the corner, which means Orktober is right around the corner, so I might have a couple of things in the works there. But aside from orkiness, I've got plenty of other ideas to dig through, so if you like cultural analysis and pop media that you love, sub up and check back every 2 weeks or so for a brand new cultural analysis video. But until next time, everyone, this is Gaijin Goomba, signing